to the On the Horizon podcast, Buying and Selling Businesses, brought to you by Horizon Business Brokers, your trusted guide to buying, selling, and valuing businesses. Your next opportunity is just on the horizon.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to On the Horizon. Jeremy Wolf here, alongside the man that you want on your side when buying or selling a business, Dustin Zeher. Dustin, always a pleasure to see you, my brother.
Good to see you as well, Jeremy, and hello, everybody.
Yes. So, topic of the day, Dustin, we are going to talk about how to buy a business. So whether you're a first-time buyer, this is your first rodeo, or a seasoned professional, we're going to talk about what smart buyers look for when it's time to buy a business. So let's start by defining buying criteria, right? There's so many different factors to consider when looking to purchase a business. Some of the things that come to my mind, you have industry, right? Very important. What industry you're going to buy into. Size and scope of the business, another important one. And then lifestyle. Dustin, how do you attack this when working with buyers? Like, what are some of the things that you look for when working with a client to find a business to buy?
Yeah, no, this is a great question, and something that we strategically have initial conversations with prospective buyers with to really understand what their buy box is and what industry or industries would be best suited for them and their past business experience, or what they're passionate about. Understanding how much time they're going to be able to devote to the business. It kind of fits into the lifestyle piece. Are is this going to be a business that you're going to actively own and operate and work 40 or 50 hours a week, or are you looking for a business that you're going to try to be more of like a passive operator on a semi-absentee to absentee basis, where you maybe still have a full-time job that you need to consider. So you're going to maybe be hiring staff, or maybe trying to promote from within if there's not an employee infrastructure or management structure in place at the business you're looking to acquire. So very important to define these items when looking to buy a business, because if you don't, your buy box is going to be so big and so broad that if you're engaging a brokerage or M&A firm to assist you with your business acquisition search, you're going to be spending more time and money on trying to reach out to a multitude of businesses versus kind of having a more targeted approach for exactly kind of what you're looking for in this business, right? Again, the industry, where it's located, how much time and effort you're going to have to end up, ultimately putting into this business for it to be successful.
Yeah, and like with anything else in life, preparation is key. And for something like this, I mean, this is going to be one of the most, if not the most important transaction for many folks out there that are looking to do this. So very important to sit down with someone such as yourself and really hammer into these questions and figure out the best course of action moving forward. You've worked with countless business owners. What's a common mistake that you see people make when choosing the type of business to buy? Because I could imagine that there's quite a few people out there that enter into this thinking it's a good decision, and then they get into the business and it turns out it was just a disaster for whatever reason. So what are some of the common mistakes that you see people making over and over again?
Yeah. So what's most common is really buying buying a business to effectively make a certain wage or cash flow, where they might not really have any experience, in that industry, or no passion, for that industry. And if you don't have experience and you don't have passion, then you're going to quickly get exhausted and burnt out, from that business. You're not, if you're not fully understanding kind of, how that business, runs and operates on a day-to-day basis, you can quickly get lost in the weeds and lose your tail, from the acquisition, if you're not turning the profits that you should be.
That could also
really want to hone into a business, or identify a business that is going to be the best fit for you, because I've seen the business owners make the mistake of buying a small business that they really thought they were going to enjoy it. And then once they get in, they're like, oh my God, like this is not what I was envisioning, right? It's, it's more hours. It's dealing with, if it's a customer service related business and they're not customer, service, forward facing and, wanting to interact with, with those people, then it's just not going to be a good fit for them. So, be passionate about it, because if you're passionate, you're going to have deep interest, and then you're effectively going to be able to grow that business, better, quicker.
Absolutely. That also does work both ways, I would imagine, where people might be passionate about a certain business, but they don't check some of the other boxes relating to that business. And then they get into it and they realize that they're not, even though they're passionate about the business, they get burnt out in other aspects, and that pulls away from their passion. So there really is a balance here, right? You have to be passionate, but it also has to fit your lifestyle and what you're looking for in terms of, the amount of input that you need to put into it, all these different things. So lots of different factors to consider. Are you still with me, Dustin? It looks like we're still having a little connectivity issues. Holler twice if you're with me.
I'm here.
All right. Good man. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about evaluating cash flow. What is SDE, and why should a buyer care more about that than total revenue?
Sure. So SDE is seller's discretionary earnings, also known as cash flow. It can also be identified as adjusted EBITDA. Okay. Why it's more important than revenue is because the buyer is generally buying cash flow, and the value is generally derived from the cash flow that the business generates. And then the lenders, if you're obtaining financing, they're looking at the cash flow of the business to make sure that there's enough cash flow there to support the debt service, from the acquisition, right? So let's define, cash flow or SDE. What makes that up, right? So you're looking at the net profit or loss of the business. Then you're looking at the owner's direct and indirect compensation that they may pull from the business. So direct compensation would be, like your W-2 earnings, through payroll. It could be your, health insurance, life insurance, 401k or IRA contributions. If the company is directly kind of paying those costs, for the business owner, that's a cost and expense that a new business owner may not elect to do. Maybe their spouse has, health insurance. Certainly that cash that's being contributed to the 401k or IRA is considered, free cash flow. You can do with that as you wish. You can pay yourself the extra wage, or you can, have the company pay into a retirement benefit. Then you have the indirect benefits, which would be some discretionary personal spending that may be going on through the business, for personal meals and entertainment and travel, and maybe it's personal, computer purchases or things like that, personal vehicle expenses. If these expenses are documented and verifiable, then they can be counted, towards your cash flow to help build that value up. And that's again, predominantly, as we've talked about in the past, that's where the value of your business is going to come from that total cash flow, including your EBITDA adjustments, which is your earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So your cash flow model is like an adjusted EBITDA formula where you're taking in the net profit of the loss of the business, depreciation, amortization, the direct and indirect benefits to build your total cash flow. And that's what you're looking for when you're determining your fit of the cash flow that the business is going to generate prior to debt service. Then you take that number, then minus your debt service, and then that would be what you would be left over with to pay yourself that fair wage. Or if you're looking to, promote within or hire management to kind of take over the exiting owner's responsibility, you'll know what your free cash flow is available to be able to do those things.
Got it. So obviously every business is different, and that's why this can be so complex. How could someone tell if the cash flow that they're seeing is actually sustainable? Because I could see scenarios where obviously businesses aren't always their numbers aren't always the same, right? They're not always growing. Some stagnate, some are seasonal, some have been in business for 20 years, maybe one is 5 years. So there's different metrics to look at. Obviously, you and your team are going in and looking at these numbers, but what are some things that pop out that maybe might suggest that the cash flow that's being seen in the business is not sustainable moving forward?
Well, if you see a lot of lumpiness in financial performance, so if it's really kind of, very wavy, from year to year, you're going to kind of want to look into why, right? Is that because there was economical impacts? Was that because there was some sort of, impact from vendor relationships or client relationships, right? That maybe had caused a slowdown in revenue and cash flow performance. You're going to want to look into to see, well, if the business is more owner dependent, how dependent is the business really on the owner? Maybe that owner has the relationships with these major clients.
Okay, so when it comes to cash flow, right? We were talking about how someone can tell if what they're seeing is actually sustainable. What are some other red flags that you see over and over again that scare off smart buyers? Like you're looking at a business and something just pops out at you, like, yeah, this is definite hard pass. What are some things that you're seeing?
Yeah, so definite hard passes from a lot of buyers. Again, depending on the buyer and the lifestyle that they're looking for in the business that they're, wanting to purchase, right? So a lot of buyers are, looking for, businesses that can be run maybe on more of a passive or semi-absentee basis, right? So they're looking for businesses where there's a management team in place or, employees that can be promoted, within to kind of take over the role and responsibility of that exiting owner, right? So the big red flags and the hard passes from a lot of buyers that are looking for those types of businesses that, if you're looking at a business where the owner is heavily involved in the day-to-day operations, maybe they're the license holder for the business, maybe they hold a lot of key relationships with their clients or vendors. These are big red flags that buyers will pass on because they don't have the time and or there may not be enough cash flow in the business to be able to sustain paying a manager where it would still be profitable for them. So you need to look at and be aware of, again, the day-to-day role and responsibilities of the seller, how key they are to the operational performance of the business. Can they be replaced by staff or yourself if you're willing to devote that time and do you have that experience? That's like the main thing. And then just other things are, that are, at the top of the list would be, that client dependence, right? So especially if you're seeing, some, abnormal trends or a lot of like rockiness in the business, see what that customer concentration is and, how sticky that customer base is. If you have one client in a business that's generating, say, more than 10% of your revenue, then that's something that you want to look out for, because if that client leaves, then a good part of the business is going to be going with it, and that cash flow that you ultimately were paying for. So now that's not to say you can't buy a business that has 10 or 20% customer concentration. I mean, I've worked with and sold businesses that have had 80, 90% customer concentration. So then it just comes down to like the deal structure. How do you put that deal together so both buyer and seller are comfortable and each side has some protections in place?
Yeah, so many different things to consider. That's why it's so important to have somebody such as yourself on your side to help navigate this process. Now, are there any risks that you seem that initially pop out as a red flag, but turn out that it's really not that big of a deal?
Yeah, I mean, it really back to the same points, right? So it really goes back to deal structure, right? So
The structure.
like you can't change the cash flow performance of the business, right? So like if you're not planning to be an active owner operator and you really want somebody to to manage the business for you, if there's not enough cash flow to do that, to do that from the beginning, then you obviously have to have deep enough pockets to be able to sustain the business to get it to the level that you want. But with that in mind, if you're able to move forward, if those things are in place, and again, you structure the deal where you're limiting your downside risk, because maybe the part of the value that you're paying for the business is seller financed, or it's an earn out structure. So you're only paying for the value that you're receiving, right? So upon transition of those clients, to make sure those clients may stay, sign a new contract, or either they stayed for another 12 months or whatever that trigger point is, for those revenues to be kind of realized from the acquisition.
So Dustin, what do you say to someone, or what do you say to me? I'm working with you. We find a business, right? I'm in love with the business, right? I feel like this is the right fit. This is the play. It feels right in my gut, but the numbers they feel a little sketchy, risky, whatever it is. Maybe the business is been stagnating. Maybe it's not performing the way it should, but you feel like it has potential. How do you balance that? Like, what do you say to me? Obviously there's a lot of factors that go into it, but is that something that you would ever say, yeah, let's make this work, or just pass on it?
Look, I mean, ultimately, you as the buyer, ultimately make the decision. We're here to present the facts and figures and address any questions or concerns that you may have, and connect you with the proper intermediaries. If we have a client that is so dead set on a business and they really think it's for them, as long as we don't believe that it's going to be a detriment to them, right? Meaning that it's absolutely not going to fit their lifestyle, or that the industry or the size, like their buy box. So like, you have to understand, you might have a buy box, but just like buying a house, or even a used or a new car, like you're never going to get all the options, right? You're never going to get exactly everything that you want. But if it hits the majority of those buy box items, and we're not seeing that it's going to cause you financial distress. Like, I don't want to ever sell a business that somebody is not going to be they're not going to be successful. There's going to be a financial liability to them. Like, we would be able to help see those things, and we would give our best advice to say, hey, like, it's not profitable right now, or the way that you plan to run it. So we want to ensure that you're comfortable and confident, and maybe you have a plan in place, or maybe we can help them kind of effectively put in a plan, to make sure that they're not going to be bleeding money.
It sounds to me like the lifestyle aspect is important to that, right? Like, if you're looking to have more of a passive income from a business where you're not going to be hands-on involved, obviously you want to make sure the numbers are up to par. But if you're going to be getting in there and really working at the business and restructuring it, then I think the passion rings truer than the performance of the business, because you're going to get in there and make some changes anyway. Is that a good way to think about it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So financing, right? Like, how much money do you really need to buy a business? Like what are some options if you don't have the full down payment ready? How should we think about the financing aspect of getting into a business?
Sure. So look, the amount of money that you need to be able to purchase a business for like down payment, right, really is going to vary based off of the size and type of business that you're purchasing, right? Because every business industry, and then within the industry, depending on how big how big the business is, if it's doing less than $1 million or 1 to 5 million or 5 to 10 million or whatever, is going to trade or sell for a slightly different value, right? So it's really understanding, again, what your goals are, from from buying a business, and how much cash flow that you need to be able to support your lifestyle, and obviously serve the debt from the acquisition, and hopefully have money left over to reinvest. Right. So let's just use, like, say, a very common buyer's buy box. Just say, I want to buy a business that's cash flowing $200,000. Right. So, and most businesses sell for, let's say, plus or minus 2.5 times cash flow. So that $250,000 cash flowing business is going to value out at probably plus or minus $500,000. So how much do you really need for a down payment? You need 10%, for an SBA loan, right? Generally speaking, that's going to give you a loan for 10 years. It's going to be around prime interest rate plus a spread of about 2.5 to 3 points for most lenders. That's your most simplest approach to financing a business and the down payment requirement there. But there are many other avenues that you could pursue for financing. To finish that thought, that's financing options from SBA to conventional to seller financing to private, to working with private lenders, to other resources like HELOCs and Rob's program. So again, probably another topic that we can speak about in the future for sure. Going back to your other question, and
culture, right? The importance of culture when buying a business with an existing team. I can see how unbelievably important that would be, especially if you're going to be hands-on, right? You go in with a team and they just, for whatever reason, they have different values, different way they run things. There could be a huge clash there. It could be a big problem.
Yeah, no, you hit it. So buyers are going to look for that. Sellers, the good sellers are concerned about that for their team and for their clients as well. So, we recently worked a transaction for an IT service business, and we had done a business valuation. We had gotten multiple offers, prior to even coming to market. We ended up coming to market, and we had 200 plus inquiries, within a matter of 2 weeks. We ended up getting 10 more offers for this seller. The offers ranged from anywhere from about $50,000 to $100,000 or so, below asking price and above asking price. We came to market at 6. Buyers were making offers, $550,000 to $720,000. The buyer that got selected by the seller wasn't the highest bidder. They were just short. They were willing to pay $700,000. But the reason why the sellers, forewent the extra $20,000 is because they felt that buyer was the absolute best cultural fit for their team and for their clients. And because you have some situations, not in this one, but because you have some situations where you want to make sure that there is a cultural fit for the continuity of the business, because maybe there's a seller note or an earnout component that is attached to how the seller gets paid, and you want to make sure that buyer is a good fit culturally with the staff, because if they're not, then the business is going to get disrupted, and then potentially the seller is not going to get the full value out of their business. And again, for a buyer, if those core values and beliefs don't align with the buyer and maybe the acquiring entity and the business that's being acquired, then are you really going to be able to bring these two companies together and have a good bond and relationship, for that business to continue to grow and nourish and be successful? Or are these employees going to end up clashing because they can't decide on certain policies or procedures, or their, whatever the case may be, their beliefs and how they might do things, don't jive, right? So it's very important for buyers and sellers alike to make sure that there's a good cultural fit, between the buyer and seller employees.
What about in a scenario where I could see this happening, where a business owner is looking to sell the business, but they're not like advertising that fact to their staff, right? They don't want to let everybody know and get everybody scared, ruffle any feathers. So you're coming in to buy, how do you assess the culture if you don't have immediate access to the staff?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So you're right. When you're looking to buy a business, the broker, the seller, they're really generally not letting the buyers, speak to the staff, because if the staff finds out about the business being for sale, they're employees and have employee mentality. So, they could get spooked and, they could leave, and that doesn't benefit anybody. They could, tell other employees, they could tell, customers, vendors, and this could definitely cause, issues across the board for seller and for the buyer. So you really have to, for the buyer, you have to kind of ask deep questions, about the staff. Get an employee overview of the staff, or an org chart, and see how long the team members have been employed, right? So if they've been there for 3, 5, 10 plus years, then it's probably a pretty safe bet to assume that business has a pretty good culture, right? Where the employees are staying around. That must mean they like their job. They must mean that they like the employees are all working well together. Ask about the benefits programs that the seller is offering. These are key indicators that the employees are happy. If benefits are offered, and then you're seeing what the buy-in to the retirement plans or the health insurance plans are, that's probably a pretty good indication of how what the culture is like at the business. If there are key employees that have deep vendor relationships or client relationships, depending on how big the company is, depending on how comfortable seller may be, there could be an appropriate time where you maybe speak or meet with the key employees to kind of get an understanding of who they are, what they do, and how they feel about the culture and of the business, and you can assess if overall it'll be a good fit for you. I say that is done. It's not done commonly. When and if it is done, it has to be done at an appropriate time, and that's generally after all other due diligence items have been satisfied, right? So from your financial and other operational due diligence, from maybe landlord approval if there's a lease, getting bank loan approval. It's just make sure that everything is in place before this key employee or employees have been informed of the potential sale and interacting with a prospective buyer. And you may even find that like maybe earnest money deposits or something could be put up, a non-refundable, if something like if that was to take place. So there are other ways for a buyer to get comfortable and understand the culture without talking to any of the employees or just maybe a select number of employees.
Certainly a lot to consider. Very complicated process. So important to have a trusted professional on your side. So let's leave it at that, Dustin. Very informative, good stuff. If you're out there listening, and if you're out there in the market looking for a business, or maybe you're a seasoned pro, let us know what your biggest takeaway was from this episode. We're always interested to hear your feedback. We appreciate you joining us, and we will look forward to catching you next time on the next episode of On the Horizon. Everyone take care. Have a wonderful day.
That wraps up this episode of On the Horizon podcast, Buying and Selling Businesses, brought to you by Horizon Business Brokers. If you found value in today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone ready to take their next step. For more resources and personalized support, visit www.horizonbrokers.com or call 703-910-7384. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time on The Horizon, where buying and selling businesses creates opportunity.